today's talk, we have Mr. Alan Moore. Mr. Alan Moore is a veteran in Singapore's advertising. He's a pioneer and also a well-known figure in the industry. He's the founder and curator of Advertising Archive Asia, which aims to preserve advertising and design work. So the talk today is on the sticky, tricky history of advertising in Singapore. I'm sure your interest is piqued. And let's welcome Mr. Alan Moore to share with us more. A round of applause, please.
I'll tell you what tricky and sticky is when we get to it. But, you know, these nice people from the library board, you know, they got me really out of a museum. So I sort of been released, and now I'm ready to tell you. It's very strange to be a relic in your own lifetime. You know, I mean, it's kind of pull you out and say, please talk about it. And really I talk about it because it has changed so much. Anybody that was in advertising during my era will hardly recognize what it's become today, and vice versa. In fact, if you could take me back to 1920, and I would fit in very well. I could go back to 1950, fit in very well. You like Don Draper. I don't know whether any of you saw the program Mad Men, but that was, well, it didn't do much work. As I recall, I worked a lot harder, but the drinking and the smoking was very common. But, you know, I could go back in time, but a young art director or writer today would find it very hard to go back because it's changed so dramatically. That's not to say one's better than the other, but it's just the way that things have changed. This was my first computer. Didn't know what I could do with it really, but it looked nice. So it sat on my desk most of the time. And I just looked at it because I thought it was very cool. You know, it's a nice blue color, transparent, very nice. But it didn't do very much. We didn't really link up to the internet until later, so it was like a glorified typewriter, but more difficult. So that's where we were. But what I didn't realize that this was the start of the start of something terrible, a monster that would destroy the world as I knew it. Absolutely destroyed advertising as I knew it. People lost their jobs. A lot of the artists in the studios could not change. I had a dear friend called Nasir, who was a studio manager. He's died, unfortunately, now. But we said, look, you've got to learn to work this machine. And he just couldn't cope with learning how to use a computer to do artwork. And I'll explain how we do artwork, which is partly what this is all about. So it actually destroyed and it killed many agencies. It killed a lot of suppliers, people who lived off the agencies because they didn't exist. Even some of the photographers died because people started thinking, I can shoot just as well. I've got a camera, I can go out. Or they can download pictures or steal pictures from places. So it affected a lot of people. It was a revolution that really changed the industry. I have a bit one way or the other about this whole thing because I'm going to talk about the nostalgic days, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want to go back to the days when I sat at a typewriter and then had to put white paint where I'd made a mistake. Of course, you had secretaries and PAs in those days, so it wasn't so bad, but it was a great change that's came about. And for us, it was difficult, but I worry because I see when it came in, it was very useful. It's like the mobile phone. It was very useful. You know, suddenly you could talk to anybody, anywhere, at any time. And advertising, of course, started to migrate into digital advertising, which was fine also at the beginning. But now we've got to an era where it's actually, to me, a threatening element to us, everybody in this room. I am not so sure that this is a good era that we're entering into. I'm not here to lecture on this, but it's just an aside to me. I find it very dangerous. when people start interfering with elections, where people are not reading anything of any depth. You know, we have a beautiful library. I've moved to Malacca. I tell you, I miss the library here so much. It's so wonderful. You know, here in all the outlying areas, there's stacks of books to read. I live in Malacca now, and you know, I'm reduced to getting online books, or I have to order them. But the thing is that nobody's reading. People are not reading as much. I teach now. I'm teaching English in Malacca, and the kids don't read anything. They don't read a book. Now that's fine in one way. You say, well, okay, that's technology, that's the way the world moves on. But the frightening thing is that the knowledge that they get is so superficial about everything. And the knowledge that we're all getting if we're not reading books or newspapers. So we're actually in a very dangerous era, and I find it quite frightening. But anyway, I'm going to take you back to happier days. Well, I just want to say, you know, we have lost an innocence that we had. You know, even advertising, we may appear to be very cocky, but, you know, we were also, in a way, naive. You know, ads were ads. You knew they were ads. They sat in the paper like that. That's an ad. You knew we were trying to sell you something. Now you don't know you're being sold things. It's coming in all different ways. And you're not looking at fresh things because they keep refeeding you. All the things that you already know, all the things you already like keep coming back. So in a way, we've lost our innocence. The kids have lost their innocence, you know. They can access pornography. You know, they know more about sex at 10 years old than I did at 25. You know, so it's a different, completely different era. So, come back with us upstairs and here to a more carefree time. So I'm going to just talk about that. Advertising was simpler. If you look at the ads upstairs, they're straightforward. Have a bit of fun, nice illustrations, nothing deadly about that. So back in time, back from my tirade to the old ones there. So let's just talk about how ads were done, because it has changed so completely. Those of you who are younger, and I don't see any very young people here, but ads are created in a completely new way these days. So we had a visualizer, an art director who actually had to draw every ad. And in those days, you had to draw. I studied art, so I had spent hours in life classes learning to draw. Of course, I went there because I saw girls in the nude for the first time. But, you know, I was very naive, as I just said, so it was exciting to me. I couldn't go online to see that, but I had a model in front of me I could sketch and look at. So you had to draw before you went into advertising. So they draw up the whole ad and headlines, and even to this day, I can what we call tick in a headline very neatly. So it looks like the type that you're going to use. And so you had to have all this, and you notice up here, sort of lines that show where the actual small type, where the text went. All this had to be drawn in. There was no other way. And that's what would be shown to a client. These days, of course, we pull images off the internet and we set the type. It looks like the finished thing. But the good thing about that, it gave you a bit of flexibility, because I have been to a situation where we've taken beautiful pictures off the internet, taken by the top photographers in the world, including one sitting down here. And we have top photographers' work, we set the type, and then the client gets the final ad, and he said, that ad, you know, that photograph's not as good as the one I saw, the type doesn't look as good, because we cheat. Well, we cheat because we make it as finished as we can. This layout gives you flexibility, so you could actually make some changes and the client wouldn't even notice. First technology that came in was Letraset. Anybody know what Letraset is? No, it's a smattering of people. Not bad, not bad. Big technical advance to us. So instead of putting in the lettering letter by letter by letter, we could actually stick down. Only problem with this stuff was that everybody would use up the A's and the E's and the I's, and you'd be left with drawers full of Z's and Q's and things that you never use. So that was I used to have drawers of this stuff, all unusable, but this was a big technical advance. At least it looked neater. My first job was as a typographer. That's a job that's disappeared, never heard of again. My job was to work out where the type went, what size it should be, what leading, in other words, what depth. What you see there is a leading gauge. It tells you how many lines it would make and how deep that would come. And we used to have to actually type, we had to count every character of the type, so we'd know how much type would fill that space. A very skilled job, because if you went one line over, you might have to reset all the type again. So we used to character count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then you allow for the spaces. Maybe if you like it tight, it's a half instead of a full one. If you have a lot of capital letters, maybe you've got to double the space. So somebody had to sit down and actually work all that out. No computer where you can try it and move it one way or the other and make it. You had to do this. So it's quite a difficult job, and the typographer also had to suggest the right kind of typeface to go with it. And you couldn't see it, you see. You only had a sheet that told you what that typeface may look like. But now, you can even set it on the type, and you can actually see what it looks like, make it bigger, change the spacing. Not in those days. It was quite tedious work, really. But in one sense, that was the craftsmanship. The production of ads didn't change much. As I said earlier, I could go back to the 1920s and feel quite at home. As you can see, this one was probably from about 1890 or 1900, and that was probably 1950s, 1960s. It's not much different. It didn't change. All those years, we produced ads in very much the same way. Those ads outside were done the same way. Well, in fact, you can see a whole era's going past. They were done in exactly the same way. So what you had to do with your type was pick each letter up one by one. So he'd have what he calls a stick. This is called a stick. And the reason I got the job, I'll tell you how I got the job. Terribly difficult to get your first job in advertising. Nobody wants to employ you, right? But I happened to have found in someone's garden, I was cleaning windows as a student, and I found an old printing press half buried in the soil, and I didn't really know what it was, but I dug it out, realized it was this hand printing press. And I restored it, and I got rollers for it, and I started printing little cards for people. It was, for those who are technical minds, a platen inking letterpress. So you press down, the ink would go over the type, next one, the paper would touch the type, and there would be your image on the paper. That was the extent of my knowledge, but it so impressed the creative director of the agency, he said, "We need a typographer. You're the man." And I didn't even know what it was. I actually went and studied for 2 weeks before I started to find out all about it, because I've been drawing nudes all the time down at the college, so I didn't know too much about that. I knew about women's bodies, but I didn't know too much about these kind of things. So then, but I learned to do this with my own printing press. And basically what this is called a case. A lot of people buy these for decorative purposes because it's nice to stick little pictures in, and that you can buy them, old ones. But this is a stick. Have you heard the term uppercase and lowercase letters? It comes from this. Uppercase was where all the capital letters were. So it was a big case, it's about this big. So the guy would, I want a capital letter, I want a number, I'm up the top. Lowercase, I want the E's and the O's, lowercase down here. So you pick them up. So it became known as upper and lowercase letters, capitals and small letters if you want. And that's how it derived the term. But you can see how fiddly it is. Each letter had to be put with a space. If you wanted a space, you put a space in between each letter. So it's quite tedious. When I came to Singapore, this was how it was done. The Cofords was the company that did it. They had hardly any typefaces. Coming from London, of course, I was used to having a wide choice of typeface. But, you know, Singapore only had about like 3 typefaces. You could have Times Roman, Grotesque, and something else, you know, that was about it. So the typographer or whoever worked out the type would send it down to Cofords. Then you'd have to wait 2 days for it to come back, because you're waiting for the printer to put it all in a stick and then proof it up and show you. Now you start to understand why a typographer is important. You get it back and you say it's the wrong size, there's 2 more days lost. So you had to be very accurate about how you worked out your type in those days. So a lot of craft went into these kind of things. And that was how it was all locked up, either by wedges or these things that turn, they're called coins, and they locked up the type. So that's how advertising was done. This is Futura typeface, a very popular typeface. When I was in London, we were working on British Rail, which was the national railway company, and we needed to get a fresh typeface. Now you've got to remember, these typefaces were not everywhere in those days. Futura wasn't in London. So we decided to give British Rail a special look. So we flew in type from Bauer Foundry in Germany. This was designed by Paul Renner in 1927, by the way. And he's still getting royalties to this, or his family's getting royalties to this day. So, we bought it in, several sizes. Cost us a fortune to fly it in. Then we set it. And then we realized that the letters didn't set nicely together. There was great gaps between. And so what did we do? We had to cut every letter or several letters by hand and stick them down. And we used to spend ages discussing, should that be a little bit more open? Or is that too close? Or this, we were really enthusiasts. We were passionate about type. And I was passionate about type then. I still am in a way, but not like I was those. I was like fanatic about it. But it came at a cost. We had to cut, and I show you what we cut. This was what we used to stick it down. Cow gum. It was everywhere, every studio. From here, from New York. I don't know who owned it, but they must have made a fortune. I came to Singapore, and it's in Singapore. Fantastic. And it's lovely because it's made from petroleum. And in fact, I think maybe my bad memory these days is so many years of breathing in cow gum fumes, I think, you know. Or maybe I enjoyed the business so much because I was high most of the time on glue. Maybe, I don't know. But it's also, they did a spray version, and it used to go everywhere. Now in Singapore, you know, all the office buildings are locked up, you know. There's no windows. Well, there's windows, but there's no outlet. So you've got nowhere, you can't pipe the fumes or the sticky stuff out into the street. So we used to have to build out of cardboard little booths, but the spray would be everywhere. It'd be on your chair, on your clothes, everything, you know. But this is part of the sticky story. So Calgon was essential to our business because everything was stuck down. Photographic prints, type, the logo, everything had to be stuck down. And you could stick it and just move it for a little while. So you could actually move it up and down. So again, you had to have a good eye. The studio people had to make sure it was vertical and horizontal. So there's a lot of hard work went into it. It's so much easier these days, you know. You used to look back and you go, do you mean we did all this? But we did. My first job here was at Beatty. Actually, I couldn't believe it. Things have changed here too. The office was, I went in, you know, when I came from London, I had a lovely big office overlooking Regent's Park. Glass, big desk. I came here and Beatty ads, I had a little, it was about this size. I could just about get a desk in, and it was all grey and no windows. But I didn't have the courage to say, that's enough, I'm going. I actually stayed, and I stayed for 40 years, not with Beatty, but I stayed at Singapore. But Ian Beatty, you see up there, was a real pioneer in Singapore. What I will say about Ian is he had a fantastic eye for a photograph, and that he set standards in Singapore that we hadn't seen in Singapore. He lifted advertising like that. The industry owes him a lot, you know, because him and his agency did an awful lot of good work. And I didn't create Singapore Girl. You know, I came, it was already established. So, no, that up the top was their first ad. First ad when Singapore and Malaysia split. And that was the first ad. Singapore Girl. Then I moved on to a company called Fortune Advertising, run by a guy called Sunny Ong. He also was a bit of a character. Used to wear gold watches, Rolex watches, chains around his neck. And, but funny enough, we got on quite well. Mainly because he left me alone to do the advertising while he went out on the golf course. No, but that's how you got business in those days. It wasn't he was being lazy, he was getting business. We did cycle and carriage, and we won the DBS account. Who knows what DBS stands for? Yeah, some do. But I bet the young people never heard of it. Development Bank of Singapore. They wanted to change from being the Development Bank of Singapore to being a local bank, you know, a consumer bank. We got on quite well, and it's a shame. At that time, he was about the third largest agency in Singapore. No, in a way, it was unfortunate. He invested a lot of money in property. On the few occasions when property did a big dive, you know, there was back in the 80s, it went really flat, I think. And I wasn't with the agency then, but he unfortunately went bankrupt over it and had to leave the country. So that was a rather sad story, but it was a good agency. And during that time, I helped form the Designers Association of Singapore. So that you see a few of the old faces there. That was one of the ads that I did for Mercedes-Benz in those days. I haven't put many of my ads here because I'm not here to talk about my advertising, but that was quite, when I look back, that was quite adventurous for a local client, you know, cycle and carriage. They were quite glad I got away with it. Now, the only other thing about Fortune is that we were in a shop house in Raffles Place. Before it was all tarted up, there was a car park in the middle, and then there was just shop houses. And the old Robinson, where Robinson's used to be, was a hole, I think, as I recall. The thing about the cockroaches is that used to like the white paint on the artwork. As I told you, did a lot of painting with brushes in those days. The cockroaches would eat the white paint. So every time we entered, you know, some white, painted anything white, or the lettering was done in white, we'd come in the morning and it'd all be gone because the cockroaches ate it. So that was, so the second office wasn't even any better than the first office. But I had a lot more fun at the second office. There was a good agency, and a couple of people Like Patrick Lowe was one of my art directors there, and Eugene Chong, who is now at Ogilvy, was also the copywriter, and his sister was a AE with us, which is how he got the job. Yeah, so both of them went on to go right past me to a very illustrious career. So studios didn't change much, full of paint when I arrived. Everybody had paint on their desk, paper underneath. And as you can see, this changed now. You go into an ad agency now, it's quiet, there's no paper around, just banks of computers. Is it better? I don't know. But we had a lot of fun. And we had expats. No, that isn't Alan Kroll. Alan Kroll was a rather portly, red-faced Englishman. I don't know whether red was for drinking or whether he just had high blood pressure, but he certainly had a big red face. And he wore safari suits. I tried in vain to find a picture of him, but I couldn't find a picture of him. But he was one of the old school, and there were a few of them, the old school expats who walked around, I say, in safari suits, and could be seen in bars in the afternoons and things like that. So at the same time, we had local people who were coming, and Angie Mui, I met up with her not so long ago because of something else I'm doing, which I'll talk about later. And she's still around, running a framing business in Holland Village. So, but she was a pretty young thing, and I didn't know her in those days. I wish I had, you know, but there we are. But she was, you've got to admire her because she set up an agency, and there was a couple of ladies in those days who'd actually set up businesses and agencies and did quite well at it. Let's just talk about film shoots or still shoots. This is actually Angie Mui and her agency filming. So she gave me a few photographs from her early days, and this is one of the shoots that she was on. So again, I showed you earlier on how the type had changed, and now we're on to film. Of course, we don't shoot on these anymore, but thanks kindly to Sebastian. I've got some. So this is what we were shooting on. Now this man brings it up to me, but it's all he's got. It's disappearing. Nobody bothers to keep anything. It's such a shame. All the work that he filmed, he hasn't got anymore. And I say, I rang 2 or 3 people who I thought I would have some. Very hard to find the actual tape. Not tape, the actual film. This is unexposed, so you can't see any images in here. But normally, when it was exposed, you'd see the images, 24 frames through there, every second, right? So those were the days that we shot on film. And again, you'll see in a moment that we also did a bit of sticking again. So editing, of course, is very important, still is important. But instead of editing totally on the machine, you used to cut bits off. You cut a few frames off. And you go into a film editing suite and there'd be lines of bits of tape, and how they film hanging down on a washing line. I don't know how they remembered which was where, you know. They said, oh, I'll have a frame off of that one. And then go and he gets the frame. Then you have to stick it. You cut it and stick it with tape. It's when you look back, you have to laugh at what we used to do, but that's how it was done. We stuck it all together. And that would then become the master tape that was then sent away for processing. We couldn't process in Singapore. Had to send it to Japan. So that meant all the dissolves had to be indicated on the film. We actually had to draw it on here with a white pencil to show where the dissolve came. How long is the dissolve? 2 seconds, 3 seconds, half a second, whatever, would have to be indicated on here. We'd have to indicate the titles by hand. We'd have to draw them, enlarge them, put them in, draw them. I mean, you had to know what you were doing, because you send it away to Japan and then it comes back and you say, I think that dissolve should be a bit longer. You're going to send it all the way back to Japan, have it all processed a second time? No, of course you can't. You have to know what you're doing. And this was the craftsmanship that came in, that people like our friend there, Sebastian, knew the craft of how to do that. You know, it was much more skilled in some ways. When we recorded the soundtrack, let's say you had even if you're doing radio commercials, nowadays, if it's a bit too long, you can just tweak it on the computer and compress the sound. You can't do that in the pre-computer days. So you'd say to, like Susan Ng, who used to do a lot of voiceover, you say, Susan, we're half a second too long. Can you do it again? And she could redo it and take half a second off the whole commercial. Not just her, a lot of the people could do that. And that was their skill. Yeah, it's just a bit too long. Can you just speed it up? And they'd speed it up half a second over a 30-second commercial. Quite amazing. It was a pleasure to work with people like that. Transparencies. You had to retouch the black and white, the color prints. They were airbrushed. You just have a compressor here, and an airbrush, and the airbrush would spray the color over. Again, a very skilled job. With the transparencies, they'd actually bleach away part of the image, and these guys would actually put it back in. They were such skilled artists. You didn't really see it. I've seen bits where somebody's face is taken out and a new face put in, all by an artist. And they weren't famous artists hanging in galleries. These were just artisans, you know. They were just skilled people. But transparency, I'll tell you a story about transparencies. When I was in one of the agencies, not here, in London, the account executive put the transparencies next to his desk when he went home one night, ready to take it to someone, to the printer the next day. Comes in the morning, transparencies are not there. He put it next to the waste paper basket. Cleaner would come in at night, put it in the bar, the transparencies are gone. Now, you remember how serious this is. They're not on a computer. There's no record of them. It's a one-off. They're gone. Go down and find them. This guy spent 2 days on a rubbish tip in the west of London. Looking at, they knew roughly West 1, the London area, West 1. They knew roughly where West 1 was. The trucks from West 1 went somewhere there. So there's a mountain. And this guy spent and he found them. He actually found them. Thank God for him, his job. He was still there when I got there. Anyway, that was his... But, you know, there was no duplication. So you had to be very careful with things, you know. Spill your coffee over it. You have a nice big 10:8 transparency, you put a coffee stain on it. There's no copy on the computer. So printing remained very much the same and didn't change so much. And we had to go down and check all the color proofs and things like that. So, no, some things don't change. Media selection was a lot easier in those days. That's why when we did presentations, there'd be the marketing guy, I'll tell you all about that. Then up becomes the creative director. I'd like to tell you about these ads I've created. Then at the very end is the media guy, who's usually like saying, well, we can go in Shinmin, we can go. You know, it was so simple in those days that we didn't really consider them very skilled people. So now media agencies are very big and very tough. You know, they're important. But those days, media people were not important. So their own back now is that they're more powerful than the ad agencies. So after all those years of being third raters, they now top dogs. What you probably don't know is that we had no, when I came to Singapore, there was no outdoor, very little outdoor advertising. Mr. Sunny Ong, the guy with the chains and the thing, when he bought that agency over, which he bought for a song because there was some old man retiring, so, oh, what's this? Gillimar Circus, some old posters. He realized that he got one of the few, he had two poster sites, one at Newton Circus and one, and a whole batch of them at Gillimar Circus. He said, oh, okay, the rates went up like that. He made a fortune out of those sites because Lee Kuan Yew didn't want to see posters or neon in Singapore. He didn't want us to be like Hong Kong. So there's a complete ban on, you couldn't get a license to put up another poster site. So that made, you know, you didn't even have a choice now of whether you went, there were bus ads, but there was no posters. You know, this was about the time when you used to cut guys' hair when they came into Singapore. 1970. Do you know that wasn't rescinded till 1990? Do you know that? They didn't implement it, but as far as I know, people weren't pulled off the plane and had their hair cut. But people like Cliff Richard wasn't allowed into Singapore. Kitaro cancelled on us because they weren't prepared to cut their hair. But Mr. Lee in those days, he mellowed as he got older, but in those days he was pretty tough. I agree with him, the chewing gum, I can tell you that. Okay. So, yeah, and again, television was very restricted. You know, which one do you want to be? Channel 5 or Channel 8? That was the choice. So media was very simple. We had rediffusion with all these set boxes around the town. But in terms of your television, you only had two channels. So it was a very different era than we have today, where we have so many choice of channels, online, digital, social media, in-store, everywhere. It's quite a tough business now to choose media. So let me just go on, I'll finish up now. Advertising has always been an ephemeral business. You know, it's here today. Who cares about ads? They're here, gone. So they're not meant to be looked at for years. You know, they just are there and then they're gone. But it also has a social purpose, which you may see upstairs. There's parts of that in that it reflects what society is doing, what part of you, how developed you are, what we're buying, what we're wearing, what people's attitudes are. You see this, you start getting, in 1961, the women are driving the car. They're not just laying across the bonnet, you know, they used to, you know. They actually are there to show that I drive, this is my car, I drive my family and friends around. And you'll see a lot of instances of that. So if you look at ads and you put them all together, it's really a pageant of the country, a colourful pageant. So it's a great shame when it's not kept, when there's nothing around. This one we all know. Now we want you to have as many children as you can, you know. But in those days, that was different. Look at the Guinness. Aimed at Malays. Written in Malays. Where's the tudong? I see nobody's here wearing a tudong. Right. People didn't wear tudongs. The Malays, Muslims didn't wear tudongs when I came to Singapore. You could walk around Indonesia and not see. It's a new phenomenon. So it's reflected a change in the culture. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad, but it's different. It's changed. To see a man drinking Guinness Stout, well, certainly where I live in Malaysia, you know, it would be a huge outcry, you know. So these are the changes that you can see, not only in what they dress or the way they behave, but in what they buy, where they go on holidays. All these kind of things are reflected. So I just got a bit worried about it all disappearing. I had a radio program, short-lived, on MediaCorp. Lasted about 10 of them, I think, on advertising. And I decided I want to have a competition. And that competition would be play a jingle, and then when it came to the name of the product, shut it out. So I rang up the producers and I said, well, can we just get some of the old jingles and we play them and see whether people remember them? They'd thrown them all away when they went digital. They disappeared. And that was the first instance I knew that if we didn't start looking after some of the advertising or keeping a record, preserving it, it would be gone forever. Because agencies change, they move. And let's face it, when you're young, you don't really care. You're looking to the future. Who wants to look at the past? But someone has to start caring. So that's when I started thinking about what I could do. So I started to collect, when I was running Ad Asia magazine, I started to collect stories about people who were no longer in the business. Some are no longer around. Laura Tan, now she's a piece of history in herself. She started bus ads, and in the old days, she was the driving force on bus ads that everything else has stemmed from. And she still works a couple of days a week. So she must be passionate about advertising, I think. So I started this, which was the Advertising Archive. We haven't officially launched it, but it's live if you ever want to go in and see it. And if any of you have got any old ads tucked away, if any of you were in the advertising business at any stage, I want your story, because we actually have contributions from people of what it was like, where they worked, who they knew. I'm trying to collect them. If you have a picture taken when you were in advertising, just send it to me, because I want to preserve this. I don't want to see it just, we just lose our history. And it is an interesting, colourful, and a tricky, sticky business. This is some of the pages from it. How you can search by agency, you can search by category, you can search by decade. You know, those kind of things. So we have quite a lot, but we've still got thousands we haven't uploaded yet. But you can upload yourselves. You don't need to give it to me. You can upload on the site. I'm going to show you, and then we have NTUC actually have been great. They've helped sponsor us. So anybody wants to sponsor also, because it's costing me a fortune to do this, but NTUC have helped sponsor this site. And then we have a history of some of the people, little biographies of people. So that just about wraps it up. So thank you for listening, and I'm in there.
So we have a mic in the front, so if you do have a question, please put up your hand and we'll be happy to pass the mic to you.
So excellent presentation, Alan, most enjoyable. Just a question about the archive. So are you looking for print as well as, or video as well as print?
Yeah, right across. Actually, I should also say we're looking to save digital ads as well. We're not, you know, I might sound like a bit of a Luddite, you know, like I love the old days. It's true, but, you know, advertising now, we also have to try and preserve even more the digital stuff, because that is not being saved at all. At least with a print ad, you can look in, you might get an old copy of the Straits Times. You might find it. But with a digital work, it's there and it's gone.
And what about sort of three-dimensional direct mail, that kind of thing? No, not so much?
Well, yeah, I'm not fussy. I'll take anything, you know. I mean, no, I mean, one of the things I was, you know, when we thought of the name, in a way, I would like to call it really the Advertising and Design Archive. It just looks a lot better graphically this way. But I also will accept design work, and we have got some packaging on there already.
Hi, Ellen. Lovely presentation as well. And I wanted to know, because you were on the ground during that time, how quickly did your peers adapt to the digital age, from using cow glue to trying to figure out the Mac computer? How quickly do people adapt?
That really was individual, you know. So I said I lost a lot of people in the studios.
What was the attitude, I guess?
Oh, they didn't want to know. We had to force them to go on courses, the studio people to go on courses. So that was one aspect of the adaptation. I mean, but in terms of the ad agencies themselves, it was a problem because they also they didn't know what it was. I mean, none of us had had any experience of this kind of thing. You saw what I was doing all my young career. So none of us knew what it was. That's why you had a lot of digital agencies spring up. And often, or they employed somebody who said, oh, I know all about it. And actually they know nothing, you know. But we were so green, if the guy could actually do a bit of programming, oh yeah, you're the guy. Put him in charge of the digital department. And there was a lot of stupid things happened because you couldn't find advertising people who actually knew about this. So you were taking people from all kinds of areas or students, you know, straight from school. So it was a terribly difficult time for the ad industry. And I would say it took 10 years really to adapt itself properly. Some would say it still hasn't. But, you know, it wasn't an easy transition. But individually, I must say, I didn't really want to do it, you know, but I had no choice. But then, on the other hand, I'd switched from being art, which I would probably have given up myself. A computer is fantastic for doing design. I mean, in the old days, sometimes I'd design a leaflet in a particular color because that was the only color I had in my drawer. Because I cut. You know, let's say you're doing the front cover of an A5 thing. Oh, okay, you cut a green cover because you don't have a blue or a pink. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's better than going all the way down the shop to buy a new one. So often, now you're on a computer, you can choose any color. You've got subtleties of color. I mean, it's a fantastic tool. So don't think I want to turn the clock back. And in terms of writing, because I've been doing writing in the more recent past of my career, and obviously to correct stuff, to change letters, to change paragraphs and move things around, it's fantastic. I don't know how as I look back, I don't know how I worked on a typewriter. I really look back. The computer's a beautiful piece of, it's just made us such a difference. So the positive sides of it is in terms of our production. But it did, and sadly, there were a lot of good artists who just, it was a big thing. One day you're sticking things down with a cow gun. The next thing somebody's telling you, oh, you're going to do it all on this machine. And it wasn't as easy as all that in those days. You know, it's a lot easier. The programming's different. So it's a lot easier, but it was tough. So there's a lot of sad stories really attached to people who had to leave the ad industry.
I'm Maran from India. I'm the image creator. See, the whole world is ruled by the advertisement only, media only. It is controlled by through global corporate. In that, they only influence the society very much. In that case, if the society, after sometimes only the government and everyone thinks that, oh, we are spoiled by the advertisement and other things. See, for example, Singapore government, now they are realizing that we want to create a healthy citizens. Mm-hmm. Now they feel that, no, we taken all junky food and other things. How it come? because of the advertisement only. In that, what is the government policy that they are enforced to control you, or how you feel that you can do anything? Actually, you can create any number of advertisements by telling every stories. It's a creation only. When you create anything, it is not needed to the people and it is not genuine. Then how the government will enforce you? It should be, then the government later only they realize that the people are, went wrong. Then they are correcting. That is a part actually. You have a lot of social responsibilities. That is how you act. This is my question.
Yeah, it puts a lot of responsibility because it has such a big impact.
Yeah.
You know, if a government just in one small area or a town or an area says something, that doesn't matter. But now, when Trump speaks,
Yeah.
the whole world goes, "Oh my God," you know. This is, we wouldn't know what often if Lyndon Johnson used to say things we wouldn't know unless we particularly tuned into American television. Now we know because we get it on YouTube.
Yeah, indirectly the whole world is ruled through advertisements only. The whole world is ruled not only government, they are corporates only, through government, through medium in the sense, through advertisement, they rule the world. They are playing the vital role. That is the reason actually, that government and people also should know the genuinity. We are lacking of that in the advertisement.
Okay, good comment. Yeah.
Thank you.
But sir, Trump is an advert all by himself, So I thank you for a very pleasant afternoon. I'm not in your line of work. I just have a simple question for you. Can you think of any advert in your course, whether you were involved or not involved in it? Advert, whether it's just a poster and things which came out and worked very well, or any advert which failed against all the odds. I'm reminded of it because someone told me this story about the Milo advert and the Ovaltine advert. The Milo advert went very well, and Ovaltine is now dead. So can you think of any advert which really went well against all the odds?
I think sometimes I can't spring to mind in particular, but I think what that says is that the advertising for Ovaltine was consistently probably off target, whereas the Milo managed to stay on target. It's usually a consistency of advertising. It's never one ad that makes a success or doesn't. It's generally a consistent branding that continues, particularly with something like a chocolate drink or something like this, branding over the years. If you go into the exhibition, it's very interesting to see how many brands that are still around that we still drink today, or a product we still use today. Right back in the 1920s was still being sold in Singapore then. So it's usually a consistent message rather than one particular. I mean, there are ads that do pull better than others, and you say, "Oh, yeah, we had so many phone calls after that ad," but I can't particularly think of one particular one that's. But I certainly know we ran some car ads for Toyota and for Mercedes, and the showrooms were packed out the next day. That kind of thing happens. And then. Depends how many of them buy it, You can't just get people to the showroom, So, but advertising generally works, It's on the whole, it works. So that's why people put money into advertising. But I just worry about. I like to know an ad's an ad. I like to know I'm being advertised too, and I can take it or leave it. I'm more concerned about the infiltration of ideas through the social media that you may not realize are ads, through sometimes the bloggers who try and tell you things and make out that they're just being helpful. They're actually being paid, so.
Hi, I imagine that advertisement style was heavily influenced by the UK back in the past in the 60s. How do you think it's diverged since then in Singapore, and how does it compare to the UK now? How does it compare to regionally, say in Hong Kong or Thailand or Vietnam?
We're a difficult market because we're made up of lots of different cultures here. So we tend to get a bit bland. You know, it's quite difficult to appeal right across to everyone, which again is why people go in for social media and digital media, because you can pinpoint your market. But Thailand is a very interesting area because they're very homogeneous. You know, they have a culture, they don't have many foreigners there, and their advertising is really very much based on their culture. And I love their ads, you know, I love it. You can just see it, that's who they are. We unfortunately here, partly because we all travel, you know, Singaporeans study overseas, you know, they may even have their training in England or Australia. So we come back with, we don't really have, actually, you know, when I say these things, then I start thinking, you know, we do have a culture here. Yeah, we do. But in terms of advertising, we tend to be a bit bland because of that, I feel. Because we can't go in for the subtleties of that. If you're a, you know, even in Malaysia, I think there's more of a segment that understands the ads, but we tend to like the more modern. You know, we're very advanced, so we do tend to copy a bit.
Alan, thank you for the wonderful sharing. I am particularly interested in the creative process. What was your approach in coming up with the creative concept when you develop an advertisement? So if you could share something on that.
Apart from the fear that I couldn't do it, is it? I actually never had much of a problem with creativity. You know, I have at times where you really just can't get what you really want. You can always produce, if you're a professional, you can always come up with something that looks okay and you can get away with, but coming up with something special takes a bit more time. But basically, if you've had enough experience of life, then you start to draw on your experiences, because when you're talking to people, the main thing is that you want to talk to them as a human being. Are you actually trying to form a contact between you and your reader, or your viewer in the case of and I think it's a question of how well do you understand people, how well do you understand their motivations for buying. And so you are feeding in, you may have market research, you have your own life experiences, you should have read all about the product. Those kind of things are all around you. And you pull them all in and you let it just sink into your brain. And then sooner or later something starts to come and you say, this is the way I should do this. This is what I should do. And sometimes it's no good. You can come up with an idea and you think it's fantastic. And then you talk to other people and they say, that's a terrible idea. It's true, you know, because we sometimes we don't censor ourselves enough. As you get more experience, you already self-censor. You know when you're getting there. It doesn't mean you don't make errors. The worst thing is to fall in love with your idea and push it because you thought of it, rather than whether it's the right thing to do. But sometimes when it just seems right, and it is right, it's a fantastic feeling. And that's the time you can go into a client and you say, I've solved it. And you say it with confidence. And that's a nice feeling. But creativity is, you know, if you don't put anything in here, then you can't be creative. I'll tell you another secret. Oh, I tell you a secret. I do copywriting courses sometimes. I say to you, you write 50 ideas. Even if you think your first idea was the best, you don't stop. You have to do 50. I once locked somebody, I was told, I didn't remember this, a guy called David Shaw was my writer. He said I locked him in his office and wouldn't let him out until he'd written 50 or 25 headlines. And he came and told me he became, he was quite a big shot as a client. But David said that I locked him in his office until he came out. And I don't remember that. See, I'm a much nicer person now than I was then. But the concept is correct. If you just accept the first idea, you'll never move on. If you know you have to do 25 before you're going to stop. So you do 25 ideas, and then you go to bed. You come back the next morning, you look at those 25 ideas, and one of them will sparkle. But it's not stopping at your first idea or your second idea. The second idea may be okay, but is it the best? Only until you've done 25, you might realize it is or it isn't the best.
Okay, and with that, we wrap up today's session. And let's appreciate Mr. Alan Moore again for his wonderful sharing today.